Okay, so as you continue to enter your first and last name and your organization into the chat so we know you're here, that's how we'll take attendance. I'm going to get started. Welcome, everyone. I'm Lorraine Garcia, Communication Manager and Public Information Officer with Coachella Valley Water District. And I am your moderator for today. I will be doing some introductions with the CV Water Counts representatives, giving you a very short overview of the class, and also a brief history on our water supply. That is our topic for today. And later I will introduce our speakers and they will give you some in-depth presentations on those topics. The Water Counts Academy was formed in 2017 by CV Water Counts, a collaboration of the 6 local water agencies. The Academy's focus is to raise awareness and to educate local community leaders and residents about water issues. I thank you for applying and wanting to learn more about local water. I'm always happy to hear that we have folks who want to spend 5 weeks with us learning about my favorite topic, water. Now I'm going to introduce our representatives from the CV Water Counts group. We meet monthly to discuss water conservation outreach and other water issues. Of course, I'm Lorraine from Coachella Valley Water District, and we also have my colleague Jason Lucas here.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to the class.
And do we have someone? Oh, yes, Desert Water Agency. We have Ernie.
Thanks, Lauren. Yeah, hi, everyone. My name is Ernie Valenciano, Public Affairs and Water Planning Coordinator for Desert Water Agency. I'm really excited to be here. It's my first year. I know there are several experts in here that are going to share some information with you. So I'm excited. I hope you are too, and enjoy the webinar.
And we have Gloria from Indio Water Authority.
Hello, everyone. Welcome. My name is Gloria Hernandez. I am the Senior Water Management Analyst, and I'm happy that you guys are here.
And we also have Michelle from Indio Water Authority.
Good afternoon and welcome. My name is Michelle Seen. I'm the Administrative Services Manager with Indio Water Authority.
And Marion from Mission Springs Water District.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Marion Champion, and I am the Government and Public Affairs Manager at Mission Springs Water District. And we serve customers up in the Desert Hot Springs area, both water and wastewater services. Thank you.
And do we have anyone from Coachella Water District? No. Myoma Dunes? Well, they may join us later, so let's get started. This is a 5-week course. I have listed all the sessions here with the topics, and you probably have received an email with all this information as well. All classes are on Thursdays from 12 to 1:30, and to receive your certificate, you must be present at all 5 sessions. If for some reason you cannot attend, please let us know so that we can arrange for you to make up the class. And once again, at the start of each class, please provide your first and last name and your organization so that we know you have attended the class. So what do water agencies do? Well, we serve the community with critical services such as drinking water and sewer services. Public health is a top priority. We operate and maintain thousands of miles of pipelines and many facilities, day and night, rain or shine. We have lots of employees who work hard every day to keep water flowing to homes and businesses. And when there's emergencies, they're out there fixing pipelines, hydrants, valves, and more. And that's rain or shine. Our business is 24/7 to serve the community. We also collaborate and manage water resources to ensure water for future generations. And we understand that in 5 weeks, you will not learn everything there is to know about water, but we hope that you can gain some insight on what it takes to serve our communities and to manage water for this valley. A little bit of water history. Many of these agencies are no stranger to serving our community or to managing water sources. Coachella Valley Water District is 105 years old, formed in 1918 to protect local water sources and to bring imported water to the Coachella Valley. Mission Springs Water District and Myoma Dunes Water District are celebrating 70 years of service this year. So congratulations to both agencies for such an important milestone in serving your community. Desert Water Agency was formed in 1961 as a special district to ensure adequate water for the western part of the Coachella Valley. And in 2000, Indio Water Authority was formed to deliver water to the city of Indio. Now, where does our water come from? Many of you may already know this, but if you don't, we are very lucky to have a natural groundwater basin underneath the valley floor, also known as an aquifer. It's filled with water, sand, gravel, and clay sediments. That natural layering of these sediments protects the groundwater delivered to customers. It acts much like a filter that you use in other parts of your home, such as your refrigerator, a Brita system, or even a fish tank. If you've seen those types of gravel that are used in those filters, it's very similar, which is why we have such great high quality water in our area. The water is pumped from the ground, as you can see in this graphic here, and sent to homes and businesses, and also into enclosed reservoirs for later use. Water is stored there. And when homes and businesses use the water and it is flushed out of those areas, it goes to what's called a water treatment plant, where water is recycled to use for irrigation on landscapes, such as golf courses. So back into a little bit of that history. CVWD is the oldest agency, and so it's important to note that after it was formed in the 1920s, water leaders were already looking at ways to replenish water into that groundwater basin that was being pumped out for customers. And so in the 1920s, CVWD acquired rights to build the replenishment ponds at Whitewater to capture natural runoff from nearby mountains. Then in 1934, CVWD contracted with the U.S. Bureau of Reclamation to participate in the Boulder Canyon Project, which included the construction of Boulder Dam, which is now Hoover Dam, the All-American Canal, and the Coachella branch of the All-American Canal, which CVWD maintains and operates. And in 1949, CVWD began delivering imported Colorado River water to local farms. Colorado River water is important to this valley. It wouldn't be what it is today without that canal that's bringing in that imported water. Dropping ground levels in the early days when we had about 8,000 acres of farmland, the leaders already knew that we needed to do something to replace that water and to reduce the demand on the aquifer. And so without the canal, it would have hurt agriculture and prevented this area from becoming a world-class tourist and resort destination. CVWD delivers 260,000 acre feet of Colorado River water to local farms today. And by doing that, it reduces demand on the aquifer or groundwater basin, and it also replenishes the water used by customers in the Eastern Coachella Valley when available. And in 1963, CVWD expanded that whitewater facility near Palm Springs for replenishment that we were looking at in the 1920s for replenishment. CVWD and DWA, Desert Water Agency, became 2 of 29 state water project contractors to bring imported water from the Sierra Nevada to replenish the groundwater basin. And our first speaker is going to take a deeper dive into this topic. And finally, in 1973, CVWD and DWA received the first water deliveries for replenishment to replace water used by customers in the West Valley. So this is a perfect segue into our first presentation on groundwater, streams, and imported water. Our first speaker is Mark Kraus. He is the General Manager at Desert Water Agency. and he has been there for about 28 years. Prior to working at DWA, Mark worked in the private sector, and he also currently sits on several state water project related boards and committees. Mark is a graduate of Cal Poly San Luis Obispo and is a registered California civil engineer. And he is a member of many related associations. Now I'm going to give Mark a minute here to get ready to share his presentation with us. I'm going to stop sharing my screen.
Can you all see my screen now?
Yes, so everyone please welcome Mark Krause.
Thank you, Lorraine. Great job on that presentation. I feel like I don't need to do too much work after that. Thank you for having me again this year. I really appreciate that. A couple of your slides touched on something really important. DWA is a state water contractor. That's why we were created. And we do import water into the Coachella Valley, but we do that in a lot of different partnerships. We do that with CVWD. We have a lot of agreements with each other. We bring our water in together through the same facilities. And we also have agreements with Metropolitan Water District in an exchange program that we do. So Robert Chang and I spend a lot of time together working on these projects every year and making sure that we get as much water into the valley as we can. Our water supply consists of groundwater. DWA has rights on several different surface water streams, and we'll talk about those a little bit more in depth and about groundwater, and of course, imported water. So DWA acquired a couple water districts early on in the 60s. We started off as just a water importer, but then we bought the Palm Springs Water Company and the Cathedral City Water Company. And what came along with those acquisitions was rights to two or three local streams. Three of them come out of the San Jacinto Mountains. One is Chino Creek, which comes down out of the mountains underneath the Palm Springs Aerial Tramway. And so we divert water for the tram out of that creek. And then we have Falls Creek and Snow Creek, which are also out of the San Jacinto Mountains. If you go to where the 10 and the 111 come together and you look off towards the San Jacinto Mountains, you'll see a big canyon, and those two stream sources are in that canyon. And then we later on, probably 10 or 15 years ago, we acquired rights on the Whitewater River, which, if you're not familiar with it, if you go up the Whitewater grade, you go over a bridge, and sometimes you'll see water running in that stream bed. Sometimes it's dry, and during the wintertime, usually it's natural runoff, but then we import our water supply using that stream as well. So for DWA, these are important sources because they were the original sources for Palm Springs. At one time, they were supplied just surface water and there was no pumping, and then pumping started. So it still constitutes about 5% of our local water supply, and valley-wide it's really 1%, but to us it's a little bit more significant. So there's some pictures here. On the left, that's a diversion in Snow Creek. So you see that concrete. We back the water up, and then we take it out of a pipeline behind that concrete structure. And that's kind of how we do it at all the different stream sources. We talked a little bit about the aquifer already, and this is a pretty good graphic over here on the right. These are the different types of soils. We have a non-permeable, where the particles are packed together very tightly. That would be a clay, non-porous, non-permeable. This is a little bit more open. It might be silt, and so it could hold more water, but the water doesn't move freely through it. And then you have connected pore spaces like sand and gravels. And that's what we have out at Windy Point, where we have our spreading bases. We have really good sand and gravel. The water infiltrates into the ground really rapidly, very easily. And this depiction down here at the bottom, this is a replenishment pond. So that is sort of a graphic representation of what we do. We bring the water in, we put it in a pond, and then it it goes through this material that we just talked about, this porous permeable material goes down through what we call an unsaturated zone. That's between the ground surface and where the water table is. And then you're into the aquifer down here, which that's totally saturated. And then it's held there because there's bedrock below it. And that's how we replenish the groundwater basin. But the groundwater basin is also, we have some outputs, we're pumping out of it, we're supplying homes. These homes are sending the water back to wastewater treatment plants where a lot of it's recycled, not all of it, but we're working on doing all of it eventually. And we also pump waters out of the aquifer for agricultural purposes. And then over here on the far right, there's a hydrologic cycle. You put water out there for the crops and maybe your grass at your house, and there's evaporation that goes up and makes clouds, and then the rain comes down. Some of that water, goes back into the aquifer. Some of it lands in the mountains and creates snow. And the streams that we just talked about are all snow fed. So all that water comes down all year long. Those streams run all year long. And that's a great way to store water in a snowpack. This is just a slide to give you an idea. We like to talk about acre feet a lot, and that's a term that's not super familiar to everybody. It's basically just an acre of land with 1 foot of water on it. But what does that mean in gallons? It's 325,851 gallons. So there's quite a bit of water in an acre foot. How does it relate to a home or water use in a home? Older homes use about 1 acre foot a year. That's 326,000 gallons. Newer homes are 3 times as efficient. They use only 1/3 of an acre foot, and that's 109 gallons. So try to keep that in mind as we go through this. We'll be referring to acre feet a lot more than gallons. This is an aerial view of our valley. So, you can see the Salton Sea down here in the east end of the valley, and then all the way up here is where Palm Springs is in the northwest. And you can see that there's a lot of different basins. We have a Desert Hot Springs Basin, Garnet Hill, Indio, or the Whitewater River Basin, and the Mission Creek Basin. The reason we have different sub-basins is we have the San Andreas Fault that goes right through the middle of our valley. And it's just not one fault, it splinters and then comes back together. So up at the west end of the valley, it splinters, and we have a bunch of basins up there. We have the Desert Hot Springs Basin, which is a hot water basin. The water's pretty brackish, and that has a capacity of 2.5 million acre feet. And then we have Garnet Hill, which is right along the freeway. It's a really small basin, and that's a 1 million acre foot sub-basin. We have the Mission Creek sub-basin where Desert Hot Springs takes its water from, and that's a 2.5 million acre foot basin. And then this kind of mustard colored basin, the really big one, that feeds most of Coachella Valley water, or it's most of the groundwater for Coachella Valley Water District and for Palm Springs as well. And that's a really big basin with 28.8 million acre feet. And I think that's really just the top 1,000 feet of the saturated zone. So there's a lot of different subbasins. This red line is the watershed. So that's just water that runs off the mountains. That's the extent of it. So there's quite a bit of runoff area. And this black line here kind of outlines the edge of what would be the groundwater aquifer. So as was said before, we are a state water contractor. There's 29 of them, along with CVWD. We're the 2 state water contractors in the Coachella Valley. We cover the entire valley as far as our boundaries go. And that's because everybody in the valley needs to have that water supply, the imported water supply. We were formed in 1961, as Lorraine said, and we work with the Department of Water Resources, which is who runs the state water project, and we pay them a great deal of money for the infrastructure and also for the transportation charges to bring that water down. And this map of California kind of shows the system. The system runs all the way from Shasta, Lake Shasta, way up in the northern part of the state. comes down the Sacramento River and through the Delta. And then we pump out of the Delta and bring it down into Southern California. So it's really the entire length of the state. It doesn't quite get to us, but it's a very long system. So the State Water Project really relies on snowpack, and so much rain falls that if there's no snow, most of it hits the mountain, and once the ground is saturated, it just runs off and it goes out to the ocean. This is the Sierra Nevada right here. There's a northern, central, so they break it up into quite a few different zones. But essentially all the snow melt or all the rain that hits the mountains comes right into this area. This is the Delta near San Francisco, and it runs out to the ocean if you can't capture it. So if you can't pump it while it's running out, or you can't store it in a lake, then you miss it. But if you have it in snow, it melts off slowly. So during the winter time, when it's raining, and snowing, we're capturing some of that rain, some of that runoff. And then as spring comes and the rains sort of stop, the snow starts to melt and provides us a steady flow of water all the way through the summer. I mean, that's the way it was designed to work. But you can see in 21 and 22, there was very little snow. And in 22, there's a little bit more, and we're having a really good year this year. But whenever we have these kind of conditions where there's very little snow, we end up having short water supplies and very minimal. So we're trying to adapt to that, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. But that's kind of the gist of how the system works, and the snow is very critical to us. And we talked about the water coming down into the Delta, and that's a Central Valley. And so there's the Sacramento River coming down here, and we have the San Joaquin coming this way. So it runs actually from south to north, and then it all converges here in the Delta. And this is our pump. This is a 4-bay for our pumps. And so we pump out of the south end of the Delta and then into our canals and bring it down, and it hits all the contractors on the way down. If we don't capture it, it goes out. What this is just the inlet to the San Francisco Bay, and it hits the bay and it goes out to the ocean. So, and all these looks like arteries, but these are like islands that are completely surrounded by water, and you'll see that in our next slide. This is what it looks like from an aerial view. So those are all those tributaries, and then these are islands that have been formed for farming out in the Delta. They once were at the same elevation as the water, but over time they've sunk because of the material, the soil. And some of these are, 10, 20, 30 feet below where the water is right now. Most of them are below the water line. Some are really extreme. And so the levees are super important. I mean, if the levees were to fail, then you have this big area that gets flooded. So they're very important. But this area has more than 30 million acre feet going through it. That's about half of the total river flow in the state. So half the water that falls in California comes through the Delta. It's a huge amount of water. The water contractors and the farmers and whoever diverts from it, that's about 7 million acre feet. And it's supporting about 23 million people. So it's very critical to the state water supply. So the Delta has a lot of pressures on it. One is regulations. Back in 2007 or 2008, some court decisions really throttled the amount of water that we could take out of the Delta because it was having, they thought, an adverse effect on a lot of different endangered fish. And this is a Delta smelt, which is near extinction. In fact, I think, they're having a real hard time finding it right now. And it's about an inch long or an inch and a half long. It's a super tiny fish, but once it was very plentiful in the Delta, and now it's nearly extinct. And they don't want to suck any of those fish into the pumps, and they don't want to make it too saline by pumping too much water. And so there's a lot of restrictions, and they change throughout the year based on what's going on with the fish. We talked a little bit about the levees, and so they're susceptible to earthquake, and we have the San Andreas Fault that travels down from Eureka all the way down into Brawley and comes right through the middle of our valley, you know that, but it also goes right through the delta, which is not a good thing because those levees, if you shake them, they just kind of collapse. So that's a big concern. This is a video that kind of shows what that would look like. This is a simulation, and I'm going to skip through a little bit of it because it's a long video, but it'll give you an idea of what I'm talking about. So there's the earthquake happening, and those levees are failing. And you're going to see kind of what happens because that farm area that is below the water surface is going to start filling in. It's going to be pulling in water from the bay and from the ocean. So there's an island that just got flooded because of the breach in the levee. And then the next part of this slide will kind of show you what happens in an overall aspect. So once it's really completely flooded in here, you're having this saline water come in. It's becoming very salty. And if you remember what I said, this area right here is where we pump out for the state water project. So, and the Sacramento River is up here, and this is the San Joaquin River. So they're blocked with all this salt water, and we wouldn't be able to pull any good quality water out of there. And it could take a couple of years for us to rebuild those. Nobody really knows how long, but it would be significant for us. So we talked about environmental issues, and there's also climate change that we're facing. What this graph represents is our allocation. So CVWD and DWA together have a state water allocation of about almost 200,000 acre feet. And if we got 100% of that water, we'd have 200,000 acre feet delivered every year. And that's what was happening in these years right here. It was 100%. This is the percentage over here. But you know, when about 1990, things started to change as far as the hydrology, which is how much rain is falling and whether it's a wet year, and also the constraints because of environmental issues, not being able to pump all the time because there were endangered fish near the pumps, or the delta was getting too saline, too much seawater was being pulled in, or we were pumping so hard that we were changing the direction of flow in the delta, confusing the fish. And so over time, our reliability has gotten lower and lower and lower. Right now, it's about 58% on average. That's what we're getting. So we signed up for this much water. We're only getting 58% on average. And in the really dry years like this year, right now we're getting 30%. It was 5%, and they bumped it up to 30. But last year we had a 5% year. So in these drought years, it's really low. You can see right here where it was at. So that's a real big problem for the valley and for everybody, because we need to be sustainable. So how do you combat that? Well, back in 1975, we started getting deliveries of our allocation, and Desert Water Agency started off at about 10,000 acre feet. And because the population was still growing in Palm Springs back in those days, we were just ramping up. We ramped up to our full allocation, which was back in those days, about 38,000 acre feet. That was fine for a while. Then we realized that wasn't enough. So we bought some more water. This was back in 2003, 2005. We got some really big transfers too, which is more water on the long term. And then our final allocation grew from about 38,000 to 55,750. So that's where we're at. But you got to remember, we're not getting that. We're getting 58% of that, or even less than that. Like this year, we're only getting 30% of that. So that's why we're just driving our supply number higher and higher, because if we were getting 100%, we wouldn't need it, but we wouldn't need to acquire more, but we're not. So we need to get more and more, because you only get half of what you purchase. This is another picture of the Delta. So the ocean's out here, and this is the water coming into the Delta. Here's where we pump out of, and here's the Sacramento River. Because of the earthquakes and because of, as I explained before, because of the fish that could be around the intake, or, you know, we're pumping and we're changing what's going on in here, or it's becoming more saline. There was an idea that, you know, could we bypass the Delta and just pick the water up on the Sacramento River? That way we wouldn't disturb the flow in the Delta. We wouldn't pull any fish into our pumps that are endangered. So there's a whole bunch of benefits. It would be more reliable. If there was an earthquake, you know, we would have a water supply. We wouldn't have to wait years for that, for those levees to be rebuilt. So we have a single tunnel concept from here all the way down here. We would have a tunnel underground. So it wouldn't really affect anything up above. There wouldn't be a lot, there would be minimal environmental impact up above. And, you know, the fish would be hopefully fare a little bit better. And so that's what it's called the Delta Conveyance Project, and both CVWD and DWA are invested in that project. We are also involved in another project called Sites Reservoir. And I'm just going to play a little bit of a video so we have a graphic that we can talk about.
The Sites Reservoir will be a water storage facility that captures and stores stormwater flows from the Sacramento River.
Oop, I screwed that up, sorry.
The Sites Reservoir farms and businesses.
Okay, so Sites Reservoir is about right here. Here's the Delta, San Francisco. We're investing in a reservoir that would be built here. It's off stream, so it's not damming up the Sacramento River. It's just taking water off the Sacramento River during, you know, really wet years. Like this year, a ton of water is coming down the Sacramento River and it's just going right out into the bay. And if we had a reservoir like Sites Reservoir, we could take those excess flows, like maybe only 1 or 2% of that flow, and put it in this reservoir and have a water supply that we could use during really dry periods like we had last year. So Sites is really kind of a dry year reservoir, and it's not dependent on snow, kind of like what we were talking about before, really dependent on how good of a snowpack you have. It's really dependent upon, you know, when we have those high flow conditions. So it could be rain, it could be snow. Whenever there's a high flow condition in the Sacramento River, we can be putting water in Sites Reservoir. And as everybody knows, we go through a drought cycle and wet cycle. So the next dry cycle, we would have something to use for water supply. Also, Shasta Dam and Oroville, they release water for fish migration, and they need cold water. So they need to conserve that cold water for the summer. And Sites Reservoir can be a supply so that they can hold that water and have it and make sure that they have the cold water and enough water for the fish. So it's environmentally important as well as water supply important. So the issue is with the State Water Project, as we looked at it before, it runs down the whole length of the state and it stops in Southern California, but it stops a little bit short of coming to our valley. And that's a bit of a problem. And that was a problem back in 1961. It was, and you know, they thought, okay, do we need to extend this this facility all the way down to us? And they found a solution, but I'll just show you where they ended it for us. If you're familiar with, you know, the 215 freeway, it goes by a lake called Lake Silverwood. Right below that is Devil's Canyon Power Plant, and that's where we need to take the water from. That's our outlet, and so that's quite a ways away, and they and a lot of money, because that would be just exclusively for us. And right now we're talking billions of dollars, and back then I'm not sure what it would cost, but it would be equivalent, I'm sure, in those days. So let's take a little closer look. This is up here at Devil's Canyon. If we were to come off of there and build a pipeline, it would look like this. We would come through the Lucerne Valley alignment, which is on the other side of Big Bear, other side of the San Bernardino Mountains. So through Lucerne Valley, Johnson Valley, and then down into Yucca Valley, and down the 62, all the way down to where we take the water right now, which is in Whitewater Canyon. And there was another route. This is mostly open. This is canals. You know, some of it's in pipelines, but this would be easier to build than this because you could just not have a pipeline. You could do it on the surface. This pipeline down here, this would have to be a pipe with a lot of booster stations to get it to this area. So it's about half the distance. This route up here is 88 miles. This one's 38, but they both have problems, and both of them would cost. This is about 1.6 billion, was quite a few years ago. I can't remember what year, but it's been a while. I think there's more around 2 billion now, easily. So what did they do? They thought, well, we don't have that kind of cash. It would really hurt our economy in the Coachella Valley. What's the alternative? Well, the alternative is doing a deal with Metropolitan Water District. So CVWD and DWA have an agreement with Metropolitan to avoid spending that 1.6 billion or 2 billion. And that saves the ratepayers. And also it was a guaranteed delivery from Metropolitan. And because sometimes back in those days, there were, you know, really solid water supplies on the Colorado River. So we were getting, and we are getting still even advanced deliveries, which is over and above that 55,750. We could get double that in 1 year from Metropolitan. If there was a good year on the State Water Project and a good year on the Colorado River, that excess water, they would put it into our aquifer, which is good for us. This is just a graphic of Metropolitan Water District's Colorado River Aqueduct. It starts in Lake Havasu. This is the Colorado River. You got California over here, Arizona, Nevada. And this is a really long aqueduct that goes through the Mojave Desert, and it comes right through the valley here at the western end. So kind of by where Desert Water Agency is. And that was perfect for us. We can take the water off of there and we can trade it with the Metropolitan Water District. So that's what we ended up doing as a solution. And these are the replenishment basins. This is the Whitewater River right here. So the aqueduct kind of comes through these mountains and goes right through here. So we take the water off that aqueduct and bring it down the Whitewater River and then across here, across the freeway, 10 freeway. And then it crosses right next, I guess, across the 111 in some spots. And then into the spreading basins, and that's what these are. And that's a picture right there of the Whitewater replenishment facilities. So it's about 1,000 acres. It's really big. And they can put in 511,000 acre feet a year into that basin. We also have one up in the Mission Creek, which is for the Desert Hot Springs community. It's a smaller facility, but basically the same thing. The aqueduct is coming right through here. So we have an outlet and we put water in these basins. That's a picture of those basins. And there are a couple other replenishment facilities that CVWD runs exclusively. So I'm sure they'll talk about that. This is a picture up in the Whitewater Canyon where we take the water off of the aqueduct. The aqueduct's up here and the water's being released out of some outlets. There's some pipes come down here. Most of the water comes out of these outlets, but we take some of it through this hydroelectric plant. So you can see it coming out of it after it's creating the power. And then it goes on down the stream bed. So it kind of meanders wherever it wants to and comes across the 10 up here, across the railroad right here. This is the railroad. And then before it hits the 111 at Windy Point, kind of makes a turn. And then it starts going into the replenishment facilities that CVWD operates. And here you can see it coming down a control channel and then being distributed to the different recharge ponds. And this is what they look like when you're getting a whole bunch of water. Almost all the ponds are full. So depending on how much water comes, it depends on how many of these would be full, but this looks like it was a really good year. And that concludes my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. That was a great presentation on our water supply, state water project, and many other projects that we're working on. Please enter your questions in the chat. I do see one question about evaporation rates. What are evaporation rates?
So I'm not the expert on that, but I think it's in the range of 2 to 3%. And maybe Robert Chang might know better than me, but that's what I remember.
And here's a question from Michael. What happens when the Whitewater River is in flood state? Does that bypass the replenishment ponds? Are you limited to taking in what is agreed to, or can it take flood flows?
So they would shut down the aqueduct if we were going to get a storm. They would shut that off, and then there are, Robert knows also probably better than me, because they just rebuilt those facilities to better withstand that kind of situation where there's a large storm, and we don't want those facilities to get ruined. So they have a really great design for bypassing that flow. And then after that storm's over, we would start taking water again.
Okay, and Robert just entered into the chat that he believes the evaporation rates can be as much as 6 feet per year. Here's another question from Carlos. The Colorado River water is in peril and is being negotiated by the federal government. What if that water is cut off? So Robert Chang will be doing a presentation on Colorado River water. Let's see, what else?
I'm just going to say I'm not worried because of our arrangement, and Robert can explain why.
How much water does the replenishment site add back into the aquifer?
So the goal is to be sustainable. So you want to put in what you've taken out, probably put a little bit more in there for insurance. And that's what we do. So the water levels have been climbing since around 2009. So we put more into the aquifer than we've taken out, which is, great news. But at the very minimum, you want to, replace what you take out.
And the other second part to that question was how much comes out and then goes in. So I think you just answered that. Let's see, if the state water project allocation is 60,000 acre feet, what percentage of that is Coachella Valley's total potable water use?
I'm not going to answer that one because that's a Coachella Valley Water District question, but I can tell you that our total allocation or, entitlement, which we don't like to use that word, but that probably makes more sense. It's 194,100 acre feet. And of that, DWA is 55,750. So Coachella Valley Water District, I can't remember the exact number, but it's like 138,000 something.
Yeah, and we have groundwater. Robert is actually answering that question. He's typing the question, but we do have reports that show what our water use is. And how is it determined that there are 130 years of water in the aquifer?
Well, I think that's just the average use. And so they've taken, like I said, they only really know a lot about the first 1,000 feet of the saturated zone. So within the first 1,000 feet, they have, roughly 40 million acre feet. So I think they've just done simple division and said, hey, this is the average amount of water that's extracted, and we could continue doing that for 130 years, and we'd be okay. But at that point, it's gone. So you don't want to do that.
And Danielle wants to know if there's any issues with sediments in the replenishment ponds.
That's another CVWD question. I know there is sediment, but they work very hard to keep the sediment out of there, and they do a lot of work to remove it.
Yeah, it's part of the maintenance, and sometimes the ponds have to be dry so that we can take that first layer off of sediment. And I believe Robert's also answering that question in the Q&A.
There's not a lot of sediment in the actual Colorado River water itself by the time we get it, but as if it goes down a river channel, it scours it. So, you know, you can get a lot of silt from that.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's part of that scraping the sediments from the ponds regularly.
Right.
Let's see. Does any of the gray water used by the golf courses feed back into the aquifer?
I think a little bit of it does. When we say gray water, I call it recycled water, and it you know, it has a little bit higher salt content than, you know, well water. So even well water has salt in it, and what they tend to do is they irrigate just a little bit more so they can push that down so that their grass is healthy. So they put a little tiny bit more water on than the plants actually need.
Yeah, that's a good point. We don't call it gray water. It's not technically gray water. They're using either non-potable or recycled water. And we will have a presentation on non-potable water and recycled water later on in a different session. So I know there's a lot of questions about that, but I want to make sure that we're answering the questions for this session right now. There is one question about, is there enough water for development and expanding in the Coachella Valley?
Yes. That's in our plans. We've made allowance. You know, we have all the city's general plans worked into our water management plan. So whatever's been planned for, we're planning for.
All right, so I think we are going to move on to the next presentation just for time's sake. And I promise we'll answer those reclaimed water questions later. But for now, we are going to get to our next presentation, which is on the Colorado River. And our next presenter is Robert Chang. He is the Assistant General Manager at Coachella Valley Water District, where he has served since 2013. His primary duties include the administration of CVWD's imported water supply contracts on the State Water Project and the Colorado River. He has held various technical and management positions at the Metropolitan Water District of Southern California and the Long Beach Water Department. And he has a strong water quality and operations background, having conducted various studies supporting several federal drinking water regulations and other extensive programs. He has been involved in various water industry volunteer activities through the American Water Works Association and several other associations. He graduated from Vanderbilt University with degrees in chemical engineering and has a PhD in civil engineering from UCLA. He is a registered California professional engineer and registered professional operator with California Drinking Water T5 and D5 certifications. So I'll let Robert get ready for his presentation to share his screen. And I will stop sharing mine. And thanks again to Mark Krause for that presentation on the State Water Project and all the other projects in California for our critical supplies. Okay, we can see your screen now, Robert. Everyone, please welcome Mr. Robert Chang.
Thanks, Lorraine, and appreciate Mark's remarks and the presentation on the State Water Project. I think this is a nice complimentary presentation. I want to say welcome to the new class. Didn't realize that Mark and I had the privilege of being your first session speakers. So we'll try to make sure that everybody's expectations are met. So the title of my presentation is A River Under Pressure. So I'm going to be talking about Colorado River issues. I guess before I get too far, can everybody hear me okay?
I can hear you.
Okay, perfect. Okay, so I think you pretty much have to be a hermit not to hear anything about the Colorado River these days. And as I was going through and putting together this presentation, just went through some of the news clippings online just to see what's actually being out there. And obviously the rhetoric since the beginning of the year has gotten more and more vocal. So you can see some of the the clippings out there and some of the rhetoric. It's and none of it is very good news. And I'll go through and kind of try to sift through some of the these various headlines that you see here. So in terms of supply, I think the use of water war certainly has been kind of thrown about, and I think it's certainly feels that way at times. And you see some of these really great media centric words like doomsday scenarios, brink disaster, bringing Colorado River Dam to his knees. And I think there's somewhat true to some degree. I mean, although there's some artistic license I think that's being used in here to kind of make the point. So let's just get into a little bit of the Colorado River background, as a backdrop to how we got here. So kind of, looking at some of the graphics here, and, I'll kind of, have some speaking points. It's often being called the hardest working river in the West, as, currently supplies about 40 million users in 7 states and Mexico. So that's probably like one in, call it 1 in 7, 1 in 8 Americans. So it's a pretty big supply, for a big part of the U.S. and sustains a huge part of the economy. I think Mark kind of talked about the unit of a acre feet, and the Colorado River has been allocated among the 7 states for 15 million acre feet within the U.S. and another 1.5 million acre feet to Mexico by compact or treaty obligations. I think, it was kind of mentioned previously that CVWD was formed in 1918 to obtain, federal supplies. But I think what's relevant right now is CVWD's import supply, Colorado River water, makes up about 75 to 80% of that supply. So it's a huge component and backbone of our water portfolio. And you can see some of the, milestones around, the graphics I'm showing here. So John Wesley Powell, and then I think what's important is the Colorado River Compact, which kind of set the 15 million acre feet division in 1922. 1928, the Boulder Canyon Project Act, allowed the construction of some of these, major projects and dams. In 2007, Reclamation in concert, with some of the, with the state partners came up with the interim guidelines, which is what we're operating to right now. So just like, with anything, water related, nothing's ever easy. And this graphic here is just simply meant to show the, the number of working relationships that we have to go through to make sure that the laws of the river and the operations of the river are working. So within the state of California, we have 4 major water contractors, and you can see Palo Verde Irrigation District and then Imperial Irrigation District have higher priorities than Coachella Valley. And that is by the virtue that they were formed and beneficially used water before CVWD did in 1918. And they're the lowest on the priority, but a huge political entity in the water world is the Metropolitan Water District of Southern California, who has the junior rights in California. And then we have the 6 other states, and the seals are kind of shown here. And as if that wasn't complicated enough, then we also have the added layer of the federal government through Interior, and then also the delivery of water to Mexico, to meet the treaty obligations. I think what this slide is meant to depict is that, there's a lot of parties that we have to work with and get along with in order to make things work. So this agency has a long working history to working cooperatively with others to make sure that not just our rights and our deliveries are ensured, but also to make sure that the viability of the river is maintained for everybody. So, you can see, like, since the early 2000s, the series of different agreements that we've reached, 2003 QSA, the interim guidelines in 2007, most recently in 2019, the drought contingency plan. And then right now we're in the thick of renegotiations of the 2007 interim guidelines. So, getting on to the heart of the matter, the state of the Colorado River, what's generating all these sensationalist type headlines. If you take a look at the graphic on the left, with the little inset of the Colorado River system, the dark yellow represents the upper basin, which are the states of Utah, Wyoming, Colorado, and New Mexico. And then the lower basin, which is in this sort of dark reddish color, includes the states of California, Nevada, and Arizona. The 2 major reservoirs that feed the system are Lakes Powell and Lake Mead. And what I would like for you to focus your attention on is the reservoir level as shown by these teacup diagrams. So we've been hearing that, but this system has been in a 20+ year drought. And I just want to show you simply of what that actually means. So in the year 2000, when we started, at the beginning of the drought, the reservoirs were about 95% full. In 2014, when California entered its last drought cycle, the reservoirs on the Colorado River system were just a little bit under 50% full. So, we still had the Colorado River system that we could bank on. As of the end of last year, the system was less than 30% full. So this is not a good trajectory. And the numbers are interesting. I think they paint a story, but the physical reality is that, if you take a look at the right-hand side, these bathtub rings that you see, are real. And I say, the one that is, the middle one on the very far right, you may see a little boat, on the river, and you can see the height of the white ring above it. So I think, we've, since the height of, when the drought actually started, we've actually experienced almost 160 feet drop in these reservoirs. So it's still on a declining trajectory as we stand today. So kind of in summary, it's been in drought since 2000, and there's a real possibility of Lakes Powell and Mead dropping to what they call non-operable levels without any additional actions. So what does that mean? So I'd like to direct your attention to the right-hand graphic. The first one being Lake Powell, which is the upper basin reservoir. And in addition to being, a reservoir for holding back water for release to the lower basin, it's also important in the fact that it's a power generation facility. It's a major power generation facility through Glen Canyon Dam. This dam, when the water is released, goes through a series of turbines which generate electricity, which provide power for a lot of the western U.S. So with a decline in lake levels, namely below elevation 3490, there is an inability to generate electricity. And that's a real issue. And I think, there is a possibility that we will be declining below 3490 as chance if we don't do anything. The lower graphic shows you Lake Mead, and Lake Mead operating level, functional level has to be above like 1,000, let's say, because once you get to 950, it's considered functionally a dead pool. Basically, no water can come out of it. So in June of last year, Commissioner Tootin of the Reclamation Bureau of Reclamation, in her congressional testimony, basically said that there's an additional 2 to 4 million acre feet of reductions that's needed annually from 23 to 2026. So the question is, how do you achieve it? Now, bear in mind that the entirety of the Colorado River allocations is 15 million acre feet. So 4 million acre feet actually represents more than 25% cutbacks. So that's a big, big number. So some of the issues that we've been dealing with on this has been ag versus urban and senior rights versus health and safety. And let me just explain what that is very briefly. So again, I think, taking California as an example, if you remember one of the graphics I showed, Palo Verde Irrigation District and Imperial Irrigation District have senior rights. And in fact, you take the three, if you include CVWD in that equation, so these three ag agencies actually have more senior rights than Metropolitan Water District does. So it sets up a kind of a battle between ag and urban. And then, you can see, on the agricultural side, there's a lot of fingers pointing to agriculture as the culprit and the blame for, what's been happening. But, I think there's been some pushback saying, the products that we grow and sell and sustain the economy is essential, to the, to the American food chain. So on the urban side, they have the junior rights, as we kind of talked about in the example with Metropolitan Water District. Their fear is that, so you see, the cities being really concerned about, lack of water stunts growth. I think there was a question in the chat about, whether CVWD's, or I'm sorry, the Coachella Valley is growth constrained. And I think in Arizona, there's a big issue. I think Phoenix area is growing like crazy. And even, in Colorado, they're talking about, having set, bring your own water when you're wanting to be annexed. And this health and safety issue is very real in the fact that I think, for the people in the water community, I think what we're talking about, but, in general, health and safety water is about 50 gallons per person per day. So, we have to have minimum supplies to meet that. And when you have senior rights in ag who, dominate, that discussion, the question is when the levels get to a critical level and you have to deliver water to the senior water rights users, is there enough water to meet the health and safety demands of the cities and for municipality? And these are real issues that we're dealing with right now. So the responses and actions. I think, I'll just point your attention to the, first headline up here where it says feds will cut states' access to Colorado River water. That's certainly enough to get people's attention. And then, you can see like, some of the other actions, that's been in headlines recently from different states. I think it's kind of interesting. I think you see one up on top there that, kind of talks about Colorado, the attorney general saying that they're not afraid to litigate to protect their interests. Utah, certainly, is warning, some of their constituents that they're running out. And even, in New Mexico, in Arizona, as we talked about. So what are the feds doing? So the feds are doing two things, and they're throwing money at the problem, and they're also initiating some reconsultation of the 2007 guidelines to provide them with the legal coverage to change some of the operating rules on the river. And I'll talk about what that is here. So in terms of funding, so the federal government came out, I think it was like late last year, with this package called the Inflation Reduction Act. And I think this is, I would call it, the carrot side of the actions. So they're providing utilities with the tools, the financial tools for opportunities to conserve water. So CVWD has already put in for a component 1A, which, basically saves up to, we can get paid up to $400 acre foot at a fixed price. And we're looking at, some potential fouling programs on the ag side. The component 2 is longer term system efficiency improvements. So there's a total of about $4 billion in this in IRA funding. And, the thought is, the majority of that funding should go towards component 2 because these are more long lasting efforts rather than temporary fouling efforts. So we've been trying to, put our thinking caps on and try to figure out, okay, how we can access some of these monies, to help out, perhaps the HOAs or the golf courses to, do come along on our, conservation efforts. Okay, so the stick side of the actions. So Interior, as I kind of talked about, they actually put out a notice in the Federal Register to reopen the 2007 interim guidelines. And if you recall, the 2007 guidelines is sort of, the playbook or the Bible that Reclamation, who is the water master on the river, works by. And in there's very set prescriptive rules for water deliveries based on rights and elevation levels, etc. So why is it significant? Okay, so on November 18th of last year, the feds basically said, well, the existing guidelines are not enough to for us to be protective. And if you recall, there's that 2 to 4 million acre feet of additional reductions that need to be taken. So what they want to do is protect 3490 at Lake Powell and 950 feet at Lake Mead. So they came up with 3 different alternatives that they want to analyze in their modeling so that they can actually do an environmental coverage for that. So the first one is no action. So basically letting the laws of the river runs its course. But we all know that is probably not the best solution. So the other 2 solutions are what they call framework agreement and a reservoir operations modification. So quite simply, I kind of highlighted the words that I want you to focus your attention on here in red. So the framework agreement really is based on what they call a consensus-based solution. So meaning that all 7 states have to come together and come to agreement on what that alternative looks like to offer up to Reclamation. And then if that doesn't work, then under reservoir operations modification, the Secretary of the Interior actually has some unilateral actions that they can take under their authority. But I think they prefer not to do that. So for the last, I would say a year, I've been at the table on behalf of CVWD, along with a few other key members of our team, and negotiating with other states to see if we can come to agreement on this consensus-based solution. So unfortunately, we haven't. And as a result, you might have seen some newspaper clippings after January 30, or I guess, the beginning of this month, of saying California is being obstinate, we're not playing alone, and nothing could be further than from the truth. But I'm not going to get too much details here. I can certainly answer more questions in the Q&A session, but it suffices to say that there was what they call a six-state solution and then a California solution. So right now it's in Reclamation's hands to figure out how they're going to model this. And they really don't have a lot of time because I think they're given about a June deadline to come up and model this and then go through the environmental documentation process to make sure that they have the authority to, to deviate from the 2007 guidelines for the operations of the reservoirs for next year. Okay, so that's, the big picture. So for more local, what have we been doing in terms of CVWD. We've implemented the water shortage contingency plan. So that's obviously for the municipal side. Some of the actions that we've done and enact drought penalties, and then we provide rebates, to promote, turf removal and other efficiency measures. Last year, our board actually adopted, a few Colorado River water conservation programs. One's for the ag side, and then the other one is a replenishment facilities curtailment program. And let me just take a minute to describe to you what that is. So I think we kind of talked about, the water that we're importing, Colorado River water or State Water Project in the form of Colorado River water are all taken in, ingested, and then either, kind of fed to our agricultural communities. And then we're also replenishing our groundwater recharge facilities, which Mark described in his presentation. So that's to make up for the water that's being pumped out of the ground. So towards the end of last year, we actually worked together with Reclamation to say, okay, what if we shut off replenishment to one of our facilities? And we've shown that, I think the groundwater level is pretty good. We can probably sustain this for the next few years, but actually take some immediate actions to leave water in the Colorado River. Reclamation actually worked with us, and so we were able to leave some water towards the end of last year, obviously compensated. But I think that, to my knowledge, is the only tangible action out of any California agencies to leave water in the river in 2022. And I think we're planning on doing that in 2023 to 2026. So this agency has actually been looking at conservation for some time. We didn't really need, the last, big drought to say, conservation in a desert just makes sense. So, just kind of like to highlight, the results of some of these efforts. So on the groundwater side, which supplies our municipal customers, I think the combined actions between landscape ordinance, large landscape smart controllers, and tiered rates have conserved about 119,000 acre feet a year, and that's a big number. So that's on the municipal side. On the Colorado River side, or our ag community, these are facts that we're very proud of. I think our ag community are among the most efficient water users of the farming interests in the U.S. And we use less than 3.8 acre feet per acre per year. Another really impressive statistic is 60%, more than 60% of our ag customers have invested in drip irrigation. And these are not cheap modifications. And I think they started this over 20 years ago and have realized the benefits. We've lined the canal. So a 49-mile canal lining, the Coachella Canal, saves about 132,000 acre feet a year. And this is ongoing. And then lastly, our ag delivery system losses are less than 6% because it's owing to the fact that they're metered and they're closed pipes. And having worked in the municipal side for most of my professional career, I can say 10% system loss, even in municipal system, is considered good. And to summarize, CVWD's contributions, what are we doing to kind of answer, Reclamation's call for this reduction? We saved a little over 9,000 acre feet last year under what they call the 500 plus plan. From 23 to 26, we put in for an application to save up to 35,000 acre feet a year under Reclamation's 1A program, and we're in active negotiations with them currently. The drought contingency plan that was executed in 2019, CVWD was party to. So it looks like lake levels are going to drop in 2024 to a level that we're going to start having to make our mandatory contributions. So that could be as much as 24,500 acre feet annually. And then finally, we've been a party to the Salton Sea commitments that was just inked in December of last year between Reclamation, California Natural Resources Agency, Imperial Irrigation District. And really what this is a commitment from all the parties. Obviously, the feds are bringing $250 million to the table. But why that's important is any water that's conserved has an impact potentially on the Salton Sea. And I think there's a recognition of the importance to bringing IED to the table because they're the largest water rights holders in California, if not in the entire basin. So to have them come along and to make them a partner in this, which that includes the Salton Sea commitments, is hugely important. So with that, I'll just kind of close by with I think everybody has seen or heard of the saying from Mark Twain, but I would just say putting together this presentation and kind of thinking about where we are right now. The guy was really prophetic, and I think we're in a battle for California water rights, but also preserving the integrity of the system. So with that, I'll close and happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Thank you, Robert, for that presentation. Now we'll take some questions. Let's see. Please put them in the Q&A section so we don't miss them in the chat. We do have a question here. What is CVWD's annual Colorado River allocation? I think you mentioned that, Robert, in your presentation, but if you could repeat that information for us.
Yeah, of course, happy to. And maybe I didn't articulate it as fast or as clearly as I could. So CVWD's base Colorado River allocations, and this is gross, is 330,000 acre feet a year. In 2003, when California reached the quantification settlement agreement within California to live within our 4.4 million acre feet rights, we received another up to 103,000 acre feet. So our total Colorado River allocations, I would say, is north of 450,000 acre feet on a gross level.
Okay, so Dennis has a question about the Salton Sea. I know you mentioned that we just recently entered into an agreement, but which is different than the Salton Sea activities itself.
Yes, that's correct. So the Salton Sea has been an issue for decades now. I think the state obviously is one of the biggest parties, I think, to the solution. And there has just been, I would just say politely, a lack of activity, I think, up until recently on that. And I think one of the issues, I think for Imperial Irrigation District is that, the thinking is that, the Salton Sea is obviously, declining. I mean, I would call it it's a dead lake. It doesn't have any natural flows to it. And in times of flood, I mean, you can, certainly there's, waters that come from our flood channels or stormwater channels that go down there and you get some ag drain. But other than that, it doesn't get very much water at all. So I think, some of the activities that we're, very sensitive to is, once the dry lake bed it gets exposed, becomes an air quality issue. And that's more on IED's service area than for CVWD. But so, we're very supportive of any actions that could, help to kind of break that deadlock, within IED to, be a part of the solution on the river.
Thank you. Our next question is from Randy, and he is wondering if there are other water river sources that CVWD can use other than the Colorado River.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great question. I think, the only other major source, I mean, as Mark talked about in his presentation, is really, the Sacramento River. And, we're trying to get, as much as we can, down here. But, I think to actually physically get that water into our service area is, hugely expensive. So I would say the short answer is no.
And Andy is wondering, what does it mean when we say canal lining? And how are they lined?
Right. So yeah, thank you for that clarifying question. Lining, okay, so canals typically are expensive. Let's just put it. They you have to go in, you have to, do a lot of earthwork. If you're lucky enough to kind of do earthwork in an area that, is not real porous, meaning like, sand and gravel type soils. And if you've got a nice clay, base, then you may not have to line it because, the idea of the canal is actually to convey water from one area to another without a lot of losses. So lining means that you're actually going in and putting concrete on the banks to make sure that you don't have seepage or minimize the seepage into the ground.
Thank you so much for that. Let's see, we have Dennis asking, Dennis is thinking outside the box and is asking if there is any science in the works to make rain in the atmosphere.
Right. So cloud seeding, I assume, is probably like the most common solution. And I think, typically it's, been with like silver nitrate, type crystals. I think there's some talks about that. And certainly we've invested in, some upper basin cloud seeding activities. But, I would say that I'm not quite sure about the efficiency of that. So, I'll just leave it as saying that's, it's an interesting concept. I just don't know how you would quantify the benefits.
Right. So Michael is asking whether cost estimates have been done to use pipelines instead of canals.
I think that's an interesting question. I'm sure we've looked at it, but, I would say most of the agricultural delivery systems in the West, in terms of moving large volumes of water have all been canals because I think, pipelines are obviously expensive, as you kind of alluded to. So I am not aware of any concerted effort of doing that type of cost estimate.
Yeah, and just to note, our distribution system where we deliver water from the canal to local farms and other landscapes is a pipe system underground.
Yeah, good point.
Let's see. We have a couple of people asking about desalination. We are a little bit far away from that ocean, but it is happening. Do you have any thoughts on that, Robert, as to desalinating water into fresh water for agencies to use?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I think is a logical question. And I think, times like this, you do have to kind of think outside the box. I think for most agencies, cost is a huge issue. And I think environmental impacts is another huge issue. So for desalination, certainly having worked in that field, in a previous career, I think from a technical standpoint, yeah, it's feasible. The question is, how much do the consumers want to pay for this water? I think we've been blessed, in this valley with relatively low cost water. And just kind of give you a comparison. I have a house on a coast, and I can tell you my water bills there are a lot more than it is out here. So, desalination might make sense in there in terms of the price difference. But I think, some of the hurdles, here in the valley for something like that, I think we actually looked at, possibly desalinating agricultural drain water, but it is hugely energy intensive. I think the brine disposal is a huge problem. And then, you got the permitting issues, and then you have the cost issues. So other than that, it's a relatively easy solution, right?
Yes, thank you. Another question about evaporation loss as to if there's any plans right now to help curb that evaporation loss from water transported in the canal in our area and other parts of the state.
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I think there's been talks about covering certain canals with solar panels. And I think it feels interesting, but I could tell you, from doing operations in a former career, um, it's probably not the best, way for, from operational standpoint. Um, so yeah, I mean, I think the short answer is yes. I mean, there's some looks at it. Are we looking at, for this district? I would say not on an active basis.
All right. And a question from Jim. Jim is asking if you see the 7 states coming to a compromise, or will reclamation impose a solution?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I do think that, the door's not completely closed. I think, I talked to our other partners in the other states after January 31st, when we submitted our different versions. And I think there's clearly room, to be working on this. So I think it is still California's position that we're going to be stronger, going in as a one package and one proposal, rather than having the feds impose, because I think, that's the one thing that all 7 states have agreed, that we can, it's better for us to come up with our own solution than have the feds impose unilaterally.
All right, thank you. Let's see, Julene just wanted to say excellent information and thank you. Let's see. I know this question has been in the media a lot, letters to the editor, but someone, let's see, Conrad is asking about moving water from the Mississippi River.
Right. It's an interesting concept, and it's certainly not necessarily a new concept. As an engineer, I think I mean that, something like that fascinates me from an engineering standpoint, moving water from all that way. But I mean, I just see a lot of, technical issues as well as political and environmental issues, associated with moving water, from long distances. I really do believe that, the days of these large infrastructure projects that we're talking about, whether you're talking about moving water from, the Pacific Northwest, which is, ostensibly closer, um, just holds a lot of issues. So I really do think that, the solution is kind of living with our means, and then depending more on local resources. But thank you for that thought.
Yeah, and the last one we'll get to, because I know we're running out of time. Again, it's desalination, but this is toward the Salton Sea. So Steve is asking if it's possible to import water from the ocean to the Salton Sea to use that flow to create hydropower.
Right. I mean, I think, technically it's feasible. But again, you've got, all the other issues I kind of mentioned. You got permitting, you got moving water, over a long distances, across, multiple jurisdictions. And then you have the brine issue, and the power issue. And I think, yeah, I mean, I'll recognize the fact that you, said maybe the flow can, create hydropower, but probably, there's still going to be a net energy sink into this. So, I think it's an interesting idea. I would just say from a feasibility standpoint, probably not, probably not the best solution.
Okay, I think we're going to wrap it up. Thank you so much, Robert, for your presentation and answering all those great questions. And I hope everyone was able to gain a little bit of insight on what it takes to manage water on the Colorado River and with State Water Project water. We will be sending you a survey. Please answer the questions in the survey to help us out for future classes. We will see you next Thursday, February 16th, and the topic is conservation, state and regional planning. So we will